Welcome everyone to the next panel. I'm excited to be talking about how the rubber starts to meet the road in terms of implementing usage-based licensing. We've talked a lot about why it's important to modernize software business models and how it's critical to revenue streams and business valuations and stock prices to have modern software business models. But when you actually start to implement these things, the ramifications span everything from corporate culture to accounting to product design to marketing, business processes, all of that. And I'm very excited to have these two panelists here with me. Rishi heads the licensing group at a software storage company called NetApp, and he's actually lived and breathed this transition for the company, running the team of people who makes this transition happen. Mark from Ericsson is the head of TV strategy at Ericsson. Ericsson's been one of the very proactive companies in the broadcast industry that has started to make this transition across a very diverse group of both regions and product and service teams. So we'll be talking about the why and the how and actually making these things happen. So before we get started, Rishi, do you want to just quickly introduce yourself to us?
You guys hear me? Okay, perfect. Hey everyone, nice crowd. My name is Rishi Khater. I am a senior program manager at NetApp. I do software licensing, essentially the licensing services group at NetApp. And we look at various topics in licensing, starting from compliance to data processing, data management, as well as entitlement operations. So I'm going to talk to you about it today.
Perfect. Mark?
Sure.
Yeah, well, you start talking, he'll adjust.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Volume.
Yeah, there you
Very
go.
good. Okay. Hi, I'm Mark Russell. I am the head of strategy for our media business at Ericsson. Ericsson is I guess you'd think of it as a large network equipment provider. We're one of the largest provider of wireless services in the world. So when you're fiddling around with your phones, it's likely that that signal is coming from an Ericsson product. We have a number of businesses in Ericsson that are associated with large, high-capacity broadband, which is the way you would think about sort of the essence of what we do. Media is one of them, and so I run strategy for that business. We have both a broadcast and a pay TV operator side to that business, so we'll talk about that a little bit when we get into the Q&A. And it's a time in the industry of enormous change. I hesitate to say disruption in a sentence because it's so overused, but there are a lot of forces that are pressuring the media business from virtually every angle, and the way you build products and services, in this era is quite different than it was even 4 or 5 years ago. So, be happy to talk about that today.
Perfect. So we're going to have our first poll question here. We're trying to get a sense of what best describes your product portfolio. So Rishi and Mark can tailor their answers accordingly. Whether you have traditional software only, whether it may be licensed on an annual basis or perpetual, whether you only have SaaS, whether it's a mixture of both, or if you're more on the embedded or hardware side of things and starting to move to a software-powered business. So a lot of blend of both already. Great. And a good mix of software-powered hardware products and appliances as well. Fantastic. So with that background, let's move to our first question. Rishi, NetApp is a well-known provider of storage solutions. And you as a company are in transformation mode, very fundamental shifts in how you build and switch products. So what does licensing and entitlement management mean to NetApp? And how do they fit into your enterprise transformation?
That's a good question. So let's look at what the core competence of NetApp is. We look at a strategic product delivery to customers for data storage solutions, right? So we look at not only storage platforms such as the FAS, AFF, what have you. We also look at the operating systems, and so that begs a question on what is the commodity that we really look at? Is it the hardware? Is it the software we sell? And so if we do both, what does that what is the offering mechanism we can come up with. So for us to look at a company which is transforming, which is reshaping itself to look at the next wave of things, to be innovative and competitive at the same time, we're looking at the evolution of licensing and entitlement in terms of how we sell, enable, price product, and how consumers are utilizing these solutions that we design and solution, right? Internally versus externally. We've also looked at kind of macroeconomic factors, so to speak, as where are these paradigm shifts coming from? I don't want to use the word disruption myself, but these are kind of the forces, as in how do customers want to utilize our products and solutions towards their own businesses, right? How do we keep the lights on in different businesses? And that's where we came up with a strategy of implementing an internal licensing solution. First of all, we look at product development. How do you look at licensing and entitlement to help product management teams, product engineers, look at not only the OS, not only the storage device, we look at its whole package, its packs and bundles, so to speak. We look at its pricing mechanism. And so strategically, having a horizontal, cross-functional team, the behavior, the cadence of coming up with these questions at the right time is what we're aiming towards, right? It's not a perfect thing today, it's work in progress, but we've set that guideline, so to speak. You're looking at the website which we launched. This is the second version of the website. We just went live I'll say 4 months ago. And this is, for 2 years in a row, it's the top 5 websites in the company. I mean, you've got 60% of sales account teams who come on the website, who look at what is the product licensing structured as? How do we help sell this to customers out there asking us the same question, as in, yeah, it's easy to say, buy my product. Well, what's the monetization model? What's the packaging and bundling and its price that we can showcase them? So this is the website. I mean, it looks like a website as the front end. It's sales enablement. It's focused towards educating the internal users how our products exist and are developed. But it's also a procurement system. So you've got workflows, life cycles. You've got teams who request licenses such as NetApp U. I mean, you all may have heard we've got this university certification concept. Customers pay to get certified by NetApp. And so we give them licenses which are for those sessions, which are deployed on those environments for customer education. So you're looking at that licensing team who not only behaves behind the scenes in a certain standard, we also enable different teams. And so that's how we collectively look at how do we now operationalize all the efforts towards customer success.
It's a very, very fundamental transformation, right? And it's the heartbeat of the organization. You have to touch every single piece of it.
Exactly.
In order to get that happen. So Mark, with Ericsson, Ericsson's sort of been proactive in this transformation of the industry as well. But there's a fundamental cultural shift that has to happen in terms of the product philosophy, in terms of the research, the development philosophy. As you responded to the inevitable need for virtualization and usage-based licensing, how did Ericsson go about it?
Well, it was funny in the first question that you asked, we have all of the above, and in terms of the way we deal with customers. Ericsson traditionally has been an enabler of other people's services, whatever they might happen to be, mainly wireless services, but also the stuff that we do in media and in other areas of the company. Traditionally, we've packaged and boxed up solutions and put a price label on it and shipped it to a customer and put a wrapper of services around it and integrated it and did the whole sort of end-to-end enterprise product type of thing. Very unmodern. And we saw about 5 years ago that the world was going to get to a tipping point where the underlying value in a function was going to go to software rather than hardware. Hardware was going to become, commercial off-the-shelf type of scenarios, and things that you would have only thought to be packaged in a bespoke blade or something that we've designed and built is actually possible to design and build in software and ship into commodity data centers. Similarly, we have stepped back and taken a look at the things that our customers are trying to achieve and sort of chunked it up into, instead of Ericsson just supplying the tech, we'd actually supply the service and the customer could sort of pay by the drink. Unbelievably different way to look at the world. We completely weren't, in a position where that idea, people didn't even understand the implications of it 5 years ago. We're at a point now where we've got probably half our media products operating in that mode. Everything from building consolidated playout centers for broadcasters that they pick up on demand to building TV platforms that have similar types of attributes. That actually required us to get that right. We literally had to reorganize the whole company. So we wound up in, and Ericsson has this issue in other parts of the business. The name of the game for us is to have in one spot all of the assets of the media business and to be able to package it with product and services in any way the market shifts, and to build that on a framework, cloud-based framework, that allows us to mix and match components to meet the needs of any operator or broadcaster, any type of media workflow they want to do, or any type of service that they want to back from us. It's been a lot of heavy lifting, and it's not for the faint of heart, and certainly that journey's not over. But that's been the path that we've been on. Exciting. I think it's starting to scale, and we're feeling pretty good about it.
That's wonderful. Thank you. So, we're seeing this across the board. It doesn't matter which industry you're in, right? We've heard from industrial equipment vendors, we've heard from broadcast, we've looked at storage, we've looked at IT. It's one step of the licensing modernization processes. You go from very manual processes, as we saw with the Gemalto case study, to a streamlined self-service type of model with intelligence coming back. When you move that to software as a service or usage-based pricing or virtualized execution, there is an entirely new level of complexity, a new level of looking at things, a new type of engineering and DevOps and release that has to kick into place. So Rishi, can you talk about NetApp's products today? How are the products? Sorry about that. How are the products evolving in response to these needs, and what role does entitlement management play in the back office in terms of making all this magic come to life?
That's a good question. So if I look at our product evolution, right? So it's data on tap, which is the core operating system on FAS systems, on AFF. So basically disk-based versus flash-based storage drives. You look at our modernization being such that Data on Tap 9.0 is changing the game. It's going in from these, perpetual licensing modes and, OS versus storage solution, here's how you go and sell, to actually 3 verticals in which you've got sub-verticals, right? So you've got the appliance, the on-prem solution, you've got cloud, solutions in which you've got hybrid cloud, gov cloud being discussed. And you've got these, private cloud versus public, if not MSPs, using for their own business as a cloud offering, right, for data management. On the other side, you've got data on tap as an OS-only selling mechanism now. So you've got ONTAP Select, which does the same magic what data on tap does, right? Across data fabric, you've got this ecosystem now. You've got these ton of options that you can implement in your data centers and look at how it best serves your company and business strategy, right? And so when you look at how we want to sell these, we look at what is the license and entitlement, the model that we want to go with. So we've looked at, for example, cloud. It's one of the big topics going on, but we've actually looked at what sections or verticals does cloud look at? Gov cloud, private, hybrid solutions, if you will. And then we've given appliances that meet that expectation versus OS and other software and features that meet that expectation. So there's this license model of bring your own license. You can buy it from NetApp. You can go to the Amazon marketplace. You can pay as you go in the cloud space itself. So a customer starting off a business, if not an enterprise, can look at their own books and make strategic decisions on how they want to support their business, right? And so when you look at a whole multitude of cloud offerings, you look at, okay, I've got several different systems of cloud offerings. How do you now sync them? How do you bring them in your own ecosystem? Call it a data center, call it a DR solution, what have you. So we just recently launched Cloud Sync, which now does the magic of beating our sync more than 50%, and then making sure 2, if not more entities can talk to each other. There's a data exchange that goes in. You can back up your data, you can parse it, you can make data-driven decisions, look at the fact picture, and then have it sent back to the entity which wants to look at it as what is that parsed data, right? So you've got raw data making inputs versus output being the processed data. And so this is what we're looking at as a full offering right now. It's like you can talk to NetApp anytime. You can look at professional services. You can talk to the licensing team. You can talk to account managers by all means. And this is how we help the audiences, if internal versus external, meet their objectives.
All these things and you want. All right, well, good. I'll start. I'm going to try to juggle all these 3 things here. Hopefully, I won't drop anything. All right. So that kind of speaks to the need for automation and scalability. We've had that theme recur throughout the sessions here, which is it's great to move towards usage-based and cloud. But if you can't scale and if you can't automate, you're not going to be profitable in that endeavor. So yeah, a really, really important lesson learned there. The other thing that we've seen very often is we tend to use cloud and SaaS as an industry almost synonymously. And that's almost 2 opposite ends of the spectrum. So if you look at modern software offerings, on one hand, you've got something like Salesforce, which is a complete and pure SaaS. It's entirely in the cloud. It's entirely usage-based billing. It is a software as a service. At the other end, if you look at something like Adobe's Creative Cloud, Adobe made a move away from packaged software and annual licenses to subscription-based pricing. But the package is essentially still packaged software. So it's packaged software with subscription-based pricing. It's not really a SaaS. It changes their revenue model. It changes the release model. It's still DevOps. But it's dramatically different from something like Salesforce. And every company at some point has to make that decision of where on that spectrum between pure SaaS and essentially virtualized software execution you're going to decide to put your products. And the answer may be different for different types of products or different types of regions or different flavors of products. So Mark, that's a decision that Ericsson had to make, where on this spectrum were your products going to be? And there was considerable impact on how you actually developed and released these products in terms of the DevOps. Could you share some of the decisions you went through and how you made them and what they meant for you?
So all of our customers in the media business were tapping into, kind of the same mega trend, and that's agility. If you think of a pay TV service for a cable or a telco or satellite operator, it's really kind of the last piece of consumer real estate that they actually own, where consumers engage with them, they have a relationship with them based on that service. That's their service. Everything else is something it's a pipe. It's a phone. They sell you a phone, but it's somebody else's phone. It's not their phone. How would you really know if it was AT&T or I love them all, but how would you really know who's servicing your phone if somebody didn't tell you? I mean, it's a pipe. And so their presence is important, and that game has changed dramatically. Everybody wants to be Facebook now. Everyone wants to have that magic of the app changing all the time, constant delight. They want to know you and personalize the underpinnings of the experience that you get without you having to do a whole lot to tee that up. So that's sort of the go-in. If that mega trend wasn't there, there'd be no real reason to restructure everything. You just keep the party going the way it's been going now. But if you believe that's important and you believe that that's an area where you're going to invest in, and many of our customers do, then you have to step back and say, well, I've got to be, if I want to be Facebook, man, they release, 20 new things a day. I mean, they're like, I'd be lucky if I touch my customer once a year with new stuff. So you have to have a different outlook on, how do I think of myself as an operations entity? What is it about the way those services are set up and built that make them so agile and so robust? That was the conversation we started having 5 years ago with our customers. It's like, well, if we let go of the controls, how do we maintain the quality? Because these are very conservative customers. I understand it. They have big scale systems. If they go down, they wind up in a congressional hearing. So, they're very, very cautious about what they do with their service. And they're very sensitive to, bad customer reactions. So that began the DevOps story. And then when we originally started to discuss it, we understood it as software developers, as systems developers. So we understood it the way Facebook or Netflix understood it. And we sort of blundered in and talked to them about, blithely restringing the entirety of their operations end to end and taking 2/3 of it off their premise and all of this sort of stuff. Those were fun talks. As we got through those discussions, we came to an understanding of how to describe what is DevOps. So in other words, DevOps is the act of keeping, a system refreshed and whole. It's the act of putting new features into it. Service ops is sort of the split of responsibilities, if you like, where the operator picks up and actually programs and runs the service and gates things that come into main production. That took us about 3 years to figure out how to discuss in a sensible way, not just us, but the industry in general. And what we've found is that as we've been having these conversations, the momentum has been building to where cloud and all of the mechanics of the cloud and things like microservices and the underlying things that you need to understand if you're going to live in this world were complete mysteries 4 or 5 years ago. Today, most of our customers at least understand the conversation. They're in different places in terms of their desire to invest, but I think you have to, if you're going to do this, you have to have this alignment of you have a as a service approach, and your customers actually want that. There's something they value about it that's driving them to pick that up. Otherwise, you won't get through the hard stuff.
Absolutely. And it's almost very often when we talk to software companies about how they're making this transition, the analogy they'll inevitably use is it's kind of like trying to rebuild a plane as you're flying the Wright brothers prototype. You've got all these customers that are already using a product. They're all operational. They're trying to grow in their own right. And yet you're trying to fundamentally change what it is that you're giving to them, how often it is that it's revving. I remember back in the day when Microsoft first started started Patch Tuesday, it was a huge disruption for the IT system administrators. And over a couple of years, everyone got used to it. But these are very hard transitions, not just for the vendors, but for the customers. And Rishi, you had to set up a licensing services group in order to help your customers who were existing purchasers of existing types of products to transition towards the new models and the new pricing structures. Can you walk us through that process and how it came through?
Can you pass the mic, please? Pass the mic.
Okay.
Pass the mic.
Got it. Okay.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me now? Okay. So, good question. I have to look at how I can kind of address it. So the licensing services group, right, did not exist in NetApp 3 years ago. We actually are a startup within an enterprise. And so when you say that, the first step you see is how the industry is changing, how NetApp is recognizing that there should be a specific focus on licensing and entitlements, right? So we've become that core team, the nucleus of, how do you monetize a product? I keep saying monetize, but basically that is the thought process behind it. What is the compliance of the company, right? So internal licensing and entitlement compliance, the governance process, so to speak. How do we behave in certain situations, right? In terms of a usage of software by a company, be it in whatever aspect. If they are using software not paid for it, we look at sales enablement. We don't look at audits. We look at, let's talk to the account team in NetApp, and let's talk to the customer and make them aware of something they may not be aware of, right? So we walk and talk with the customer and have them look at a win-win situation, if not a deal. And so that said, our legacy systems, out there, they still exist. We're looking at the customers themselves now looking at transitioning to newer data on tap solutions, right? So you've got this data on tap, you've got OCI, which is host-based software, but it shows the whole usage across your data fabric, right? It shows the spikes, so to speak. You can monitor different controller sets, etc. How we help different customers is basically working with operations and helping them get the transition licenses for those controllers. So case in point, I'm not trying to be too technical, but so NetApp allows you to be, to perform an in-place upgrade. Great, you did it. Now, if you need the licenses, where do you go? Because the system grandfathered everything you've got. And that's where Ops comes in. Ops actually creates these node lock licenses, which are locked to that serial number, right? And so we have to go behind the scenes and update the IB records. So when you as a customer log in, you see that in the support site. You see that in your portfolio that, hey, I know this controller set. I know exactly what the HA pair looks like. And oh, by the way, here's my entitlement set, right? So I can use this product. I'm certified, if not licensed, to use that. And so we've been the team helping account teams. We've been the team cutting those keys out. We help internal processes go from a request mechanism to update the IB records to customer logging in and saying thank you. Last year, we did the same thing for Ericsson, right? They had a huge on-tap upgrade across the globe. I mean, we were talking to NetApp account teams in the US, in Americas, I should say, in EMEA, and we strategically help them look at all the assets they've got and how they can go to the next step, right? So that for us is a huge momentum where we work cross-functionally in different ops situations and say, here's the request that came in, we're certifying the usage is all compliant, let's go and make that happen.
Thank you. So we have a polling question, if we can get to that. Oh, there we are, thank you. So again, being that as much as we talk about the need to move towards software systems, a lot of the magic happens in the back office. And so if you can answer this poll about what best describes your license management and your entitlement management back office. A lot of self-built, self-maintained systems. Great. Yeah, and this is very typical of what we see, particularly with the larger companies or those who are in the process of transition. You start out building something internally, or you have a mixture of something that's built internally and commercial, often a mixture of commercial systems. When we had the first panel discussion today, almost 23 different systems that came together through acquisitions, and this is a challenge that we see across the board. Not only transitioning from legacy internal systems, or one of several internal legacy systems towards a unified system moving forward, also helping customers who have been operationalizing products that are based on these legacy systems and having to transition them over. These transitions are critical to revenues moving forward. They're critical to growth moving forward. We've seen that. But how well you navigate that transition is going to very stringently dictate how successful you are in your new modern avatar as a business. So Mark, from your experience, as you've moved customers from legacy business models and legacy products to the new way of doing things, even internally in terms of changing sales incentives, for example, or changing how revenue is forecast, can you walk us through some of the transitions that you've made from the legacy world to the new world, and any success stories or lessons learned along the way?
Do it. Okay, so we're all cut off. So that's another aspect, I guess, of this journey that's also sort of fraught with peril. We have scale business with several hundred major operators and broadcasters around the world, and I don't like to call that legacy. I like to call that our honored veterans. That are keeping the lights on while we grow a new business. But it is a very difficult thing to align business models going from a perpetual license model. So by and large, our license regime across Ericsson, not just in the media business, just literally everywhere, is perpetual business model, perpetual license on some unit of usage, and some kind of upgrade fee, support. You know the drill. It's very, very common enterprise model. Shifting to an as a service model, you're basically going to a monthly per subscriber fee that where support and services, all that stuff is all in. So with new features all in, all of that stuff is all in. So how do you measure the value between those two things? And the tricky part is part of the value comes from shifting to a cost they haven't actually incurred, which is if you believe you have to amp your agility up like 10x, 100x, what would that cost you in your current way of deploying and maintaining systems and your current mode of operations, if it was even feasible at all? And in most cases, it wouldn't even be feasible at all. So there's a unit of value that's known but hard to dimension. That's the first issue. Secondly, most of the customers that we sell into already have products that have similarities to the as-a-service product. So we have to sort of true up the old model to the new, so we can't find all sorts of creative calculus-like things to go from one thing to another. And it essentially amounts to a discount off the as-a-service fees for some period of time. Then there's aligning sales incentives. The salesperson, they sell a perpetual model. Typically, those perpetual licenses come with a guarantee up front, which they put that commission in their pocket. Now we're saying, well, it's pay as you go, and you might not be so good this year. How do you like us now? So that part is the other thing that's tricky. And we've done sort of similar things with our sales force where we've got bridge compensation that allows them to not take a huge hit while they're ramping up the subscriptions, and then they don't just get commission off the first thing. It's like as long as they're running that region, as long as they're running those customers, they sort of get the benefit of the subscriber licenses as they go up. But it's tricky. Again, as I said earlier, we had to reorg the whole company to do this, because it's impossible to do this across business units, like literally impossible to do this across business units. So you have to have a vertically integrated business unit that's focused on a particular slice of the business, and they can make their own decisions on comp plans and that kind of stuff. So you can imagine all the fun that goes into those types of decisions. So, but good so far.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mark. And this is another thing, that we hear across the board as we ask companies, what does it take to be ready for the transformation to subscription-based models and usage-based pricing? They all say make sure you have a cash reserve available, because the revenues go like this. You have your traditional perpetual renewals, and then you have a dip while you start to transition, and then everyone gets to subscription, and then it starts to move that way. But you always have that dip, and you have to be prepared for it. So I have a few follow-up questions for the panelists, but I want to open it up to the audience first. Do we have any questions for the panelists? Please.
Thank you. Chuck DeVita. I teach a course at Stanford to folks like you on cloud computing. And so I'm struck by this issue of the transformation. And it seems to me that the overriding issue is it's about culture. And it's about culture of the old model versus culture of the new model. And I'm curious if you have comments about that.
Well, that's absolutely right. I mean, in neon letters, it's right. It is an enormous cultural change, and you're typically asking folks who, were really raised professionally in one style of working and have done very, very well in there. So it's no knock on them. And now the world's changing, and they are the leaders that have to decide how to step back and change. And so again, if you've got to find that mega trend that's the motivator, the one that will get to the CEO, the one that'll get to the CMO, the one that'll get to the ultimate decision makers in the business, who can help the alignment come along, because it's very, very hard to change from a standard enterprise IT way of doing business and shift into this different mode where some of the underlying aspects of it feel super risky, and it feels like you're letting go of things that you held precious, and that every time you let it go in the past, the world blew up, and so that's kind of the toughest thing to get over. So again, mega trend, buy-in at the top. Otherwise, it's going to be super slow if it happens at all.
Sure.
That's an awesome question, if I may, sir. The way I'll address it is companies that are enterprise grade, that are large in size and globally spread across, it is difficult to just, jump and say we're changing direction, right? So we look at what is the process change, what is the right approach and strategy to implement which specific aspects as step one, right? What is the gap we need to address, and how do we need to get there? I'll give you an example. One of our sales model is the legacy, obviously, perpetual licensing, right? Typically sell the commodity and say, here's how it's going to work, right, at a price. Well, we keep talking about cloud. We keep talking about different, bring your own license, if not pay-as-you-go models. But we've not seen any, deep dive research, which, by the way, NetApp is looking into, as to globally, how do you behave in different, geos and regions? So, for example, Japan is not hell-bent on going cloud. They want to stay consistent on perpetual licensing and on-prem solutions. So how do you gauge that? How do you say, I'm going to make that paradigm shift to you guys? You cannot. Some are just going to stay as is. It's a cultural shift for the customer as step one. Then we take it as, okay, how do we enable them as their business goes forward? That's what we're looking at. So it's easy to look at US changes or America, the whole geo, America's geo, has changed the following steps, but it's difficult to look at APAC, to look at EMEA based on compliance, legal, how you can monetize your product in that domain. There are some barriers which we are addressing.
No, that's a good point. And in fact, it reminds me of a story I very often heard when we cover technologies that are equally applicable to civilian and defense sectors. Inevitably, every shift conversation ends with, but for the DoD, it's all offline, and therefore it still continues in the old-fashioned way. And so yes, culture plays such a huge role with that. Ariella, do we have time for one more question? One more? Yes. Yes, that too. Security is a huge deal for healthcare as well. If you have a software update glitch on an insulin pump, that's not a side effect you want to deal with at all. So we have time for one more question. Please. Yeah, no, that's a good question. So maybe let me take that first from an Uber level, and then I'll pass it on to both of you. If you look at the base year numbers, typically for any of the industries that we cover, right? So I should have probably said this earlier. I sit in the digital transformation group of a market research firm called Frost & Sullivan. And so we look at everything from connected healthcare to video to media asset management systems, storage cloud, and whatnot. In almost every forecast that we have, absent a few that are very heavily SaaS today, what we're seeing is that the revenues from cloud are typically somewhere between 5 and 15%, depending again on the market. But the growth rates are typically 5 to 25 times on the SaaS and cloud side, what they would be on the on-premises. So for most markets, the general trend is on-premises revenue is falling, even as cloud and SaaS are skyrocketing. But let me turn that over, for each of your individual businesses. What is it like this year, and how does the future look?
So in our business, I'll just say, new portfolio, current portfolio. Over the last 4 years, we went from 0 in new portfolio, so subscription-based services, to just over 20% of our total revenue. So our total revenue mix this year will be just over 20%. We expect the lines to cross, because the growth curve is in the subscription model. So we've got a healthy growth curve now. We expect the lines to cross sometime in the next 2 to 2.5 years. We think we'll our portfolio. Well, Ericsson Media. So I can't speak for the other businesses, but our media business will be like that. But I have to say, every single other business unit in Ericsson is on this path. So they'll have different rates of change than we will, but they're all on this path. And so let's say within 5 or 6 years, I think that would be true for all of Ericsson.
Rishi, do you want to take a crack?
Yeah. In our business, in our core business, it is difficult to put numbers in terms of which products yield the maximum financials. For that, I highly recommend looking at the 10K report. But my point is, the new products that we've launched, right, the software only, the cloud offerings, it's not really taken that momentum yet to really gauge, oh yeah, that's one of our core strategies, and so erase some of the legacy solutions. We cannot do that yet. So the core is, yes, we will continue with the perpetual licensing, except we will be revisiting, what's the best step forward as cloud offerings go in. You cannot just say, perpetual does not really apply in a cloud situation because you've got these multitude of different products and services from different companies, so to speak. You've got AWS to deal with, you've got Azure, you've got NetApp, right? So in these domains, you cannot really make those financial decisions. It's based on the customer input and the volume of sales, so to speak, that you'll start looking at over a period of 2 to 3 years. What's that S-curve looking like, right? When do we yield to that maturity level?
Absolutely, and I think, just to underscore that point and drive it forward a little bit, you're also looking at opportunity cost, and you're also looking at, to some extent, fungibility of revenue, to use a very large word, but we're seeing in more and more types of products, you can separate the software, which is the intellectual property that differentiates you, from the hardware that's underlying it. We've had stories where, for example, there's a vendor based out of France who finds that if they provided the CPU, essentially an HPE Moonshot server that ran software for a buyer in Norway, their price would be, let's say, X dollars. If the Nordic customer bought their own Moonshot within the country and did not pay the import duties, the net price to the customer goes down by 30 or 40%. The profitability for the original vendor actually goes up because they don't have to take the hit on the bill of materials. And so when you start to look at profitability and when you start to look at growth, the transition to software-based models and just separating everything, looking at different ways of shipping it, yields dividends in more ways than just what a simplistic percentage revenue might indicate. So you have the session summary up on your screen. If you have any other questions for us, please send them via chat or email, Twitter. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Rishi. Pleasure to have you both here today. And thank you, everyone. Wish you a good evening.